Hi, and welcome to Girls' Lunch, your mealtime companion where we talk about food, gender, sexuality, and where everyone is welcome. I am Julia Andreas.
I am Nicole Hilton, and today we have a special guest.
I am Jennifer Cognard-Black, and actually, at one point in time, was an English professor for both Julia and Nicole. So I'm particularly excited to be here with both of them at the same time.
You had us in class at the same time, which probably was insufferable in some degree.
I know.
So
No. You
can't take us anywhere.
You brought sparkle and laughter to the classroom, not to mention lots of insights as well.
Yeah, so Jennifer, we have asked you here to be a special guest on this, our food, gender, history podcast that is much inspired by the class that we took with you and all the wonderful things that we learned there. For our listeners who may not be aware of your voluminous body of work, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Tell us whatever you want to tell the people at home.
Yeah. So again, I'm Jennifer Cognard-Black. My last name is impossible to pronounce, and so students all call me just JCB, although Jennifer's fine as well. I've been, at St. Mary's, all y'all, for 25 years now. I just finished my 25th year.
Oh my goodness.
I know. Very early on at St. Mary's, I got interested in whether or not I could take kind of a sidebar passion project of mine in grad school, which was reading novels with recipes with my friend from grad school, Melissa Goldthwaite, and to kind of decompress from dissertation writing. Mm-hmm. We would get together and cook a recipe or two out of a novel that we were both reading just for fun. And then when I was a brand new professor here, I got this idea and I said, I love these books. I am a foodie, a lifelong foodie. Would there be any way I could teach an upper level class that might bring together my passion for food with my love of reading food novels in particular, although then I expanded into food memoirs, food poems, et cetera, et cetera. And my chair at the time, Professor Robin Bates, you would both know. Robin, and you can't be surprised by this given who Robin was, he said, that sounds delightful. And so as my chair, he let me develop this course, which I called Books That Cook. And actually, Melissa, who got a job after grad school up at St. Joseph's University in Philly, she said, you know what, I'll do it too. And so from the beginning, they weren't parallel courses, but we were both developing these literatures of food classes at the same time at our respective small liberal arts colleges. That was kind of the initial sort of push for this class. I taught it for the first time. I looked it up in 2003. I was thinking it was 2002, but it was 2003. Wow. I taught that first time Heartburn by Nora Ephron. I taught like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. I definitely taught Fried Green Tomatoes. And then any short story, I had a lot of trouble when I taught it the first couple times, finding enough books that actually had recipes integrated into them. This, of course, now has exploded. Yeah. And you can't keep up. There's so many of them. But the main idea of the course, which has been true for all the times I've taught it, was that, okay, we won't just read novels that are about food and that have recipes embedded in them. We'll actually cook the books, hence Books That Cook. Yeah. And so even in that very first class, students would choose a recipe out of one of the books that we were reading or a couple of recipes, and they would make them for the class. I started the dish history really early on, so people did a little bit of research about the food that they were bringing. And then, we always kind of just love the idea that we were consuming the text in more than one way, right? We weren't just consuming it with our minds, we were also consuming it with our bodies, and then we would just kind of talk through, as you both know, like the significance of that particular recipe, why the author decided to actually put that recipe into the book, what it meant for the characters, what it meant for the readers, et cetera, et cetera. So been doing this for a long time now. And I guess I should mention that Melissa and I then, these classes were so successful. They've always been the classes that have had the longest wait list, for sure. And we didn't have, I said early on, it was hard to find texts. And so there was no anthology of literatures of food that had recipes embedded in it. And the scholarship around this was really nascent.
And so you had to make one.
And so we made one.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like that old adage, like, write the story that you want to read. Mm-hmm. We put together the anthology that we wanted to teach. And so our anthology is also called Books That Cook. And
it is available for purchase at most major retailers.
It is. It's on
Amazon. Is it on bookshop.org?
It is.
Yes.
It is indeed. It's published by New York University Press. We've worked with them subsequently on another anthology. They are fabulous. I highly recommend university presses. People don't always think about that. They think, I'll go to Amazon and buy it. But actually, if you go to NYU Press, they get more of the proceeds. So That's the place to go. And it has recipe poems. It has creative nonfiction that has recipes in it, and then it has pieces of short fiction. Sometimes they're excerpts from novels, but then we also have short fiction in there as well. And everything has a recipe, so you can cook every reading in the book.
I think something I really do love about the origin of the Books That Cook that you just gave us, Jennifer, was how well it parallels the origin of this podcast, where you're like, me and my friend love to talk about food and literature and history, and we should do something about that. And that's basically how Girls' Lunch was formed as well.
Well, and to me that makes all kinds of sense because, of course, food is almost always collaborative. I mean, yes, sometimes people make a dish for themselves, but if you're really going to cook, usually it's because, you're going to share it with family or friends or a larger group, whatever it might be. So it has that collaborative element to it. But also, let's face it, particularly, kind of cooking in the home, cooking with family, cooking with friends, that's very feminized, right?
Yeah.
And so I love the fact, and recipes are for sharing, of course, as well. And the whole kind of culture of sharing recipes is, I think, very much a feminist act, and it's certainly very female identified. So the fact that you two collaborate on Girls' Lunch, and Melissa and I, not just in Books That Cook, but then our second anthology, Good Eats, and then we have articles out there in the world that we've done about teaching of food, writing and food literature, and so it's been, it's been a 25-year collaboration with Melissa. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Love that.
I do too.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jennifer, we have asked you here today not only because the whole, genus of our podcast and we love you and want to hear all the wonderful things that you have to say, but I believe today we're going to be talking a bit about the recipe.
Yeah, sure.
I did a little bit of research on the history of the recipe, and by that, like any white man, I read one article, and that makes me an expert. I read one article at 10:30 last night, which means I am an expert and I am qualified to speak on a podcast about it.
Of course, some men don't read anything, and they're still experts.
That is also so true. So I did a little bit of the history of the recipe that we can maybe talk about. I think the recipe is something that's interesting to think about in terms of what is the history of this thing, because obviously, how long have we been making food? Forever. How long have we been writing down how we made that food? Not as long, but still a really long time, because everyone has to eat.
It's a favorite pastime of humans.
It is, yeah. Something that came up in scholarship that also was just a good reminder for me, and maybe a good reminder for everybody here as well, is something that I think we take for granted about recipes and writing things down, is that for a large part of human history, your average person, however you want to define your average person, did not know how to read and write.
Right.
And so recipes are like a reminder about the skills of literacy, reading, writing, and also that those were skills that really only upper classes had for a period of time.
Yeah, and so just to add on to that, so recipes, if you imagine the people, let's say, working across Europe in those big manor houses, right, who are actually doing the cooking part of it. They cooked through their bodies. If you think about modern measurements, like a cup is about what you can hold in a hand. A pinch, a dash, all of those things had real meaning, but it was always of the body. And so when one person, particularly, women almost always, was teaching another person a recipe, they had to do it like this. They had to do it in person. They had to do it together. And that's how that wisdom got handed down. And that's true for the people who are working in the big manor houses, but it's also just true for the everyday person, right?
Right.
Who's just cooking around their open fire in a cottage, right, with the pot hanging over that fire. The pottage is what they would have called it in the UK.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth thinking about like oral tradition and oral history is also like not something that is specific to the past. Like there are still plenty of cultures and places around the world where oral tradition is highly valued. We have indigenous cultures here in the US that the oral tradition is extremely important to their culture, ways that they share knowledge and things like that.
And I mean, you all have cooked together, I assume, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so,
like all the time. Yeah, so many times.
Of course. And so you know that like even now, you might be looking at a recipe on your phone, or you might be looking in a cookbook. But again, it's very much kind of when you're cooking with someone else, it's still very much an oral tradition because it's embodied, because it is collaborative. It really works very well with speaking through it, right? And not just reading about it.
Yeah. And always make sure that you read through the whole recipe one time before you commit to cooking it. Yes. Read through all the way to the end. Do not get into like step 3 and you're like, yeah, definitely, I can do this. And then forget to preheat your oven. Or what always happens to me is I will read through a couple of steps and then realize that it's like, this needs to marinate for 24 hours. Right. This needs to sit in your fridge for 6 hours. And it's like, well, that's not what I was planning on.
Sure.
So we do still have some recipes from ancient times. So there are recipes from Egypt, Greece, China, Persia, a lot of these sort of famous ancient civilizations. One of the oldest surviving recipes that I saw is from ancient Mesopotamia in the 1700s BC or BCE.
Wow.
Which is for a series of meaty stews, meat-based stew, because the desire for good soup is universal and transcends time
and rolls through the centuries.
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
I think a great resource if you want to like find more ancient recipes is the YouTube channel Tasting History with Max Miller. He does a lot of like really old recipes and he cooks them from like Egypt, Greece, China, things like that. And the fun part is like, you kind of have to figure out how you translate this, quote, recipe, end quote, from Egypt that's just like a bunch of hieroglyphics into something that you can actually make today.
Right.
Which is always really fun.
That's ancient times. As we've talked about multiple times on this podcast before, around the 18th century, we get industrialization, the printing press, lots more people. It becomes much more common for your average person who is not like of wealth or status to know how to read and write. And we get lots more printed material that is just like available. Recipes, I would say, are part of that.
For sure. And so, one of the things that I teach, and it actually is embedded in Books That Cook, the anthology, is kind of the history of the cookbook in the United States at the very end of the 18th century. So the historians think that literacy rates in North America are at their highest right around the time that the United States is created, actually. Certainly the Puritans, the colonizer invaders, right? They felt that everyone needed to be able to read the Bible, including women, right, and children. And so literacy rates of the colonists are incredibly high, and that perpetuates for quite a while. So the first cookbook that we know of at this point, because of course things can always be found in archives or people's attics or whatever, in North America is Amelia Simmons' American Cookery. So that's 1796, so a couple of decades after the Revolution and all that kind of stuff. And she's a domestic, right? But she's literate, okay? So she, was paid to work in people's houses. We don't know much about her other than the fact that she published the cookbook. It is like a place where you start to see North Americans' foods being integrated into recipes that are written down, in English, like the one for pumpkin pie, right? Which is actually a Native American dish, taking stewed pumpkin with spices and baking it in some kind of crust. But, the colonists wind up, of course, really liking that, and now it's a staple of our Thanksgiving. She has a recipe for spruce beer. She has a lot of recipes that incorporate maize, right, or corn, of course. And so that is kind of, at least for our culture, a touchstone in terms of recipes being written down and circulated. And it was a very, very popular cookbook.
Yeah.
And one of the things, too, that has started to happen is that, like, we can trace American cookbooks more readily through, and they're almost all of them white women, as you're going through the end of the 18th century and all the way through the 19th century into the early 20th. You can trace them pretty pretty well with people who became either well-known in that moment or people who became well-known for other reasons. So Lydia Maria Child, who was really important to the abolitionist movement, for instance, and published lots of different things. She has a cookbook in the beginning of the 19th century in America, The American Frugal Housewife.
Oh, yeah.
And so those kinds of things you can find pretty easily. But one of the things that started to happen fairly recently, and in fact, one of these just came out in a new edition this year, is the rediscovery of cookbooks by Black women in North America. You may have come across the Abby Fisher, which is 1881, What Mrs. Fisher Knows About Old Southern Cooking. She was actually illiterate, and so she teamed up with other people to actually get her recipes down on paper. Okay. But the one that is just now released, I think it's University of Michigan Press, is Melinda Russell's A Domestic Cookbook from 1866, so it's even before the Mrs. Fisher. And so the fact that like these things can still be discovered in archives and be reprinted in modern editions is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
So I mean, I would love to go back to the two of you for just a minute and books that cook. And, you know, we started the semester with recipes, right?
Yes.
And so just to hear a little bit from you two about, like, your kind of thinking about that as, you know, a piece of writing, and before you came into Books That Cook, you know, how you were using recipes, how you use recipes now, what you remember from the class, all of that. Because that, I think, is the most radical part of Books That Cook, was to say a recipe is a story, a recipe is a piece of literature. And a lot of people still don't think of it that way. They think of it as a how-to text.
I don't know. I was already the weirdo that read cookbooks for fun. So coming into Books That Cook and kind of having like that brain blast light bulb moment of like, oh yeah, recipes are literature. They are cultural texts. Like they're telling you several things about who's writing them and who they're being written for. I just gobbled that up. It's just delicious. I loved that so much in that class. I remember specifically reread like a satirical cookbook with satirical recipes, and I do not remember the name of it, but it was like very like Cooking for Men or something like that.
Oh, real men don't eat quiche?
That's exactly what it is. Real men don't cook quiche, right?
Yeah, something like that. I think just viewing cookbooks through that satirical lens just really reinforced for me how much of an important document a recipe is. Like no matter how it's framed, and you know, an episode I would love to do is like food blogs of the late 2000s, early 2010s, because those are their own very, very deep texts of recipe blogs and food blogs. I don't know, for me, I find the recipe as a text fascinating because you can track so much through it that you wouldn't really expect to. What about you, Nicole?
The first thing that I remember from Books That Cook is that the assignment, was it like day 1, day 2?
I think it was day 1. I asked you to write down a recipe that you knew by heart, and I, you know, that of course struck fear in some people's hearts.
Yeah.
But I was like, no, you know how to make a fried egg sandwich, or you know how to make scrambled eggs, right? Or PB&J, or, you know, even honestly putting milk on cereal and adding some blueberries, that's a recipe. It has steps, right? And so I insisted that everybody knew one by heart. So yeah, that would have been day 1.
Yeah, so like maybe day 2 was like bring a treasured family recipe, and then you were going to swap it with somebody else, and we compiled, I still have it, our like class cookbook of everybody's recipes. Yes. And I just remember that I swapped with you, and I was like, oh, I hope I don't fuck this up. And hopefully I did a good job. But I do still have that book, and I do still... I make your grandma's apple pie pretty frequently. So
makes me so happy. Yeah. That is so great. And I would have brought, too, I'm sure, recipes from my Grandma Peg Cognard's cookbook. Well, it's not a cookbook. She did actually do, with the Methodist Ladies Society, they did community cookbooks.
That's another episode, by the way, community cookbooks.
I agree with that. Yeah. For sure. You talk about storytelling that is really kind of a historical snapshot of a group of people at a certain moment at a certain time, and it's so place-based. You can learn so much about people's backgrounds in terms of their ethnicity, in terms of do they identify as Midwestern or Southern or Californian, or, I mean, it's community cookbooks are the bomb. Yeah. They're fabulous. Yeah. And again, back to collaboration, right? the fact that recipes are inherently a genre that's meant to be shared. Although there is the secret recipe, that kind of jealous withholding of a recipe to create mystique. Then we would have also taken a family recipe, maybe or maybe not the one that we put into our little zine cookbook for class, and you would have written a recipe recollection, going back in your family history relative to a recipe. And I think that that's powerful. You know, even right now, you can think of recipes that connect you to very strong memories, right? You associate that with people in your life, perhaps people you've lost in your life. I can guarantee you that, Julia, once you have a kid, there'll be recipes that will be part and parcel of their upbringing. And they'll, of course, have favorite recipes, and they'll play around with food. And, you know, it becomes kind of this much larger narrative of self when we think about the recipes that matter to us for some reason, even if it's something that, like, we hated, but we were forced to, you know, have to confront it every Thanksgiving or every, you know, holiday or something like that. The reason I got so excited about recipes was because at first it seems like it's just a pretty straightforward, like almost a little handbook. Thanks to Fanny Farmer and the rise of domestic science, home economics, now it has a very kind of standardized rhetorical format, right? So you have always a list of ingredients followed by those instructions. And if it doesn't go in that order, you might, you know, mess up what you're doing. And so people just kind of assumed it was not a text worth studying because you only are going to read it when you're trying to make something, when you need it.
As a millennial, if I read older recipes, something that I know is that older recipes don't always put the oven temperature.
Yeah.
They'll often put it at the end or towards the end. So like if you're making cookies or something, a more modern recipe will often start with preheat your oven to 350 degrees or whatever, versus our parents' generation, I would say, at the end, it will say, like, place your dough in an oven that's been preheated to 350, you know, like, it'll be towards the end because it will assume that you'll have read through all the way.
And it won't have always servings, so you're not exactly sure how many people are going to be fed with the recipe, all of that kind of thing. But I got really interested in how, and this brings in the gender component, I think, pretty strongly, that, like, for many centuries, the people who were writing down recipes were women. And the recipe itself was seen as kind of the writing of the cook, not the writing of the chef. That comes later, right? Once we get to the second half of the 20th century into the 21st century and the Food Channel and chefs, celeb chefs, all that kind of stuff. It also becomes very masculinized, actually, with restaurant culture. I mean, just, you know, watch The Bear, which I highly recommend.
Yeah.
It became kind of like a repository of knowledge that was getting handed down, but it also, just the recipe itself can tell you so much about the historical moment, about perhaps the group of people who are sharing this information, about the foods that are available, again, like the ethnic background that someone has. And so one of the things I love to do, and I'm sure we did it in Books That Cook, is to have that first, you know, recipe that you're just, you know, by heart, and then just to kind of think about, okay, so, like, what are we learning in the title? And if you had a title like, you know, Grandma Peg's Apple Pie, then all of a sudden you're starting to think about authorship. So, like, you know, there's this person in my life who, like, authored, quote unquote, a recipe, but certainly she was pulling from lots of other people's apple pie recipes, right? So inherently it's something more than just her, but we have that desire to, like, credit it, right? And then you start thinking about, okay, it's apple pie. So what does that tell us about this person wanting to share this recipe? And of course, you know, it's American as apple pie, right? You can do a whole riff on apples in the Western world all the way back to the Garden of Eden, right? So you can think about the importance of those foodstuffs. And then you start thinking about, okay, so in a lot of my Grandma Peg's recipes, she would have this word oleo, which is short for oleomargarine, because she's born in, like, 1917. So she, you know, particularly goes through World War II, and there was all this rationing. And so they would make what we would now think of as margarine, like fake butter, out of oil, basically, which is what oleo comes from. And so if you don't know that, and you had one of her recipe cards from the 50s or something, you'd be like, oleo, what the heck is that, right? Yeah. So that pins it to a very specific historical moment. And so I've always thought that recipes are individual and familial and collective stories. They just have all of this really wonderful, rich information in them.
There's such a good exercise in, like, reading critically, critical thinking, especially for an English class, right? Of, like, you can really zoom in on, I think a lot about like what is implied with a recipe, right? What is this implying about the audience? You know, Stephen King talks about his like ideal reader, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are you assuming about your reader who is reading the recipe, right? That they'll know what certain things are, or they will automatically know
Oh yeah, totally.
certain steps or things of just, you know, that you wouldn't even think to write down because it feels obvious to you because of your cultural background or the time that you live in and things like that.
I mean, what if you didn't know what it meant to julienne carrots?
Yeah.
You know, then you'd have to like look that up, right? So, and also just kitchen equipment, right? What if you don't know what a melon baller is?
Yeah.
You'd be like, a melon baller? What the heck is that?
Yeah.
Is that like a dirty term? You know? So,
I think
you know,
that's so especially true if you get a cookbook that was translated from a different language.
oh yeah.
David and he brought home a cookbook from India from when he was studying abroad there. And the level of assumption that the book, you know, assumes that you would know all of these like different foods, these different types of cooking, these utensils, things like that. It's like nigh impossible to actually follow a recipe in one of these books because it's like, oh, you stew this for like, you know, until it's tender or whatever. And you're just like, well, when is it tender?
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean.
Right.
So yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that like you can glean a lot of what the writer assumes the reader knows and therefore like who the reader is from these texts.
Another thing that I think that is kind of amazing about recipes, and maybe why I love literature that has recipes embedded in it, is the reading experience becomes three-dimensional, right? It becomes embodied. You said that Fried Green Tomatoes was transformative for both of you, so talk to me a little bit about that.
Oh,
Because that is the one book I have always taught in every iteration of Books That Cook, all the way through.
I don't know in what way it was transformative for you, Julia, but for me, as like a little baby gay,
Yep.
I was like, are we both about to talk about the same thing?
Yeah, we are.
Itchy.
Yeah.
Ruth!
Yeah. As someone who, at the time of that class, definitely had not fully come to understand my sexuality, identity. I mean, as if I do now, you know, it's an evolving
Sure, of course.
understanding, but definitely the relationship between Iggy and Ruth meant so much to me. Like, what if I could have that, you know? And then I went and married a straight man anyway, so.
I know, I did too. What a shame.
I did too.
Yeah. So.
But yeah, no, I mean, like, basically a ditto experience as someone in college who came from a very religious background and didn't have any space to explore her sexuality. Kind of like reading that book, which sadly was some of like the first exposure to queer love and relationships. It's also like a fantastically written book and it's just such a great story. But yeah, it was definitely like a little knock on the door of like, hey, you might not be as straight as you think you are.
Yeah. Well, so like I came from a very conservative background. I guess not so much religious, but just politically conservative, and also from Appalachia. It made me feel like there could be space for me, like in this culture that seems very like, you must be the norm, women only marry men, this very like rigid set of gendered expectations about sexuality. Iggy and Ruth, their community like makes space for them, or that it's not even really like a big like, there are two women and they, you know, like it's just so not really an issue.
Yeah, and at the Whistle Stop Cafe, you know, in this fictional town of Whistle Stop, Alabama, becomes this meeting place for the quote-unquote hobos, so the unhoused, right, who are hopping off the train and are fed and taken care of. The Black population that isn't allowed to be in the cafe, even though Sipsy is the head cook, you know, and all the recipes are actually Sipsy's, so that's a powerful thing. That's this Black woman cook in the quote-unquote back in the kitchen. But that Iggy and Ruth are like, well, forget that. We'll sell our meals out the back door to the Black population and we'll give it to them for half price, right? And so like it becomes this place that brings people together in this really amazing way. And also just that, you know, Ruth is the victim of domestic violence and Iggy comes and saves her and then they raise this child together. So again, like a really, I mean, that book is from the 80s. So, we're in Reagan's America, right?
Yeah.
And the rise of evangelical television. And this idea of, what were they called? The moral majority. The rise of the moral majority. So kind of like this Christian nation, right? We're seeing this history repeat itself.
Coming right back.
Right? And so here, Fanny Flagg, queer herself, but closeted at this moment when she's writing this book, writes a beach read. It's packaged as a beach read. You can buy it in the grocery store. And then it's this incredibly transgressive and beautiful story about queer love, about not just racial tolerance, but, racial love, right? Across races, about taking care of others. And so in that way, it's like sneaky. Because particularly women in America who read these kinds of books, they read grocery store novels, they love food. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. And we haven't even talked about, there's the woman, who is, what's her name?
Evelyn
Couch.
Evelyn Couch.
She has her feminist awakening and all of that through the stories of Whistle Stop.
I mean, I could easily talk for 2 hours about fried green tomatoes. That book,
same.
It's so important to me.
And the excerpt that we put in the Books That Cook anthology is that moment where Idgie goes to the beach read. Goes to the old log.
Yeah.
Takes Ruth out for a picnic, but doesn't tell her that she's going to go stick her hand in this old log where all these bees are and bring out honeycomb for Ruth. And Ruth freaks out because she thinks Idgie's going to die because she's got bees all over her. And so Idgie gets very worried that Ruth is so upset. And she says, "I'm sorry, Ruth. I have it in front of me here. I'm sorry, Ruth. Please don't be mad at me." Mad. Ruth put her arm around Idgie and said, "Oh, Idgie, I'm not mad at you. It's just that I don't know what I'd do if anything ever happened to you. I really don't." Idgie's heart started pounding so hard it almost knocked her over. After they had eaten the chicken and potato salad and all the biscuits and most of the honey, Ruth leaned back against the tree and Idgie put her head in her lap. And then you have at the end of this section, Idgie smiled at her and looked up into that clear blue sky that reflected in her eyes. And she was as happy as anybody who is in love in the summertime can be.
Stop. Right? I'm going to cry. You say this as if I don't have this whole passage memorized.
It's just such a beautiful moment of just pure queer love, right? It's just so gorgeous. And I've always been and will remain disappointed in the film because while they have that moment and everything, they don't actually kind of allow Idgie and Ruth to be a queer couple.
Yeah, they really don't.
No.
I think, Julia, we watched the movie, right?
We did, yeah.
Yeah, and we were like, this sucks. We were both equally mad about this is so not what the book. I mean, there's always caveat. There's always challenges of adapting a book into a movie, especially a book of this length and so many characters. But we definitely were both they fumbled the bag so hard.
Oh, they fumbled it so bad.
So hard, yeah.
And actually, Fanny Flagg was really upset about that. She was part of the process of turning into a screenplay, but then found out that they were not going to really make it clear that Ruth and Idgie were in love, and that just sucks. Yeah. They were like best friends who raised a kid together.
What good friends.
Mm-hmm.
Just gals being pals.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Gals being pals. Yeah. So, one of the things that in that book, it's Sipsy's recipes, and so I've always found that, in teaching that book, whatever recipe anyone chooses to make and do a dish history of, right, it's this hardly visible character in the book. And yet she is the most powerful character because she's the one who cooks for the cafe, and she is the one with her frying pan who kills the domestic abuser Frank Bennett, right? And so
Spoilers if you haven't read the book.
The book's been out for 40 years.
Yeah, and the movie's been out for a long time too.
Yeah.
So I think that is also just incredibly transgressive by Flagg to be and those black women in the South who do all this cooking and all this work and are always invisible, right? We're going to make her really visible and really powerful.
Yeah.
And so back to what I was saying about kind of the magic of recipes. And so, to me, this book meant a lot to both of you. And so you read it and that story is now a part of you. But then, you cook Sipsy's, let's say you bake up her biscuits, right? Or something like that. Or you make her fried chicken. Then, you're also kind of carrying the book with you on a cellular level. And I love that. It becomes part of your mind and your memory, but it also becomes part of your body.
Right.
And I just think that that's just amazing. I've never, my awe about that has never gone away. I love that.
Yeah. And I think cooking recipes by loved ones that you've lost is another like way to really keep them with you. If you have a handwritten recipe by a loved one that's no longer with you, nothing to me like that, I think, is the most alive you can make them again in a lot of ways. You know, it's like, I'm getting emotional.
No, totally.
Yeah, like David's grandmother, his paternal side of the family, put together a cookbook, a physical cookbook of all of her recipes that she kept. You know, I never got the chance to meet her. She passed way before David and I even started dating. But through this collection of her recipes, you know, I really got to kind of see the person she was. There were a lot of casseroles, let me just say straight up front. Sure. This book is like 70% just casseroles. But, you know, like you said, Nicole, it made her feel more alive to me as someone who never got the chance to meet her than before, because I had, you know, the things she liked to make, the things that she often made, you know. It told me about, like, where she came from, the Midwest, and, like, her tastes in sweets, and, like, her tastes in other things, and maybe things that she found to be exotic. Like, there was a Chinese food casserole recipe. Like, it got, I'm telling you, this thing was, like, mostly casseroles. But it just brought her to life in a way I don't think anything short of, like, a literal handwritten diary would have done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And back to what you were saying, Nicole, about, like, something handwritten. Maybe I'm pushing this too far, but, like, you know, those skin cells are, like, still on that on that card or on that piece of paper or whatever. Like, you know, so it's, like, embodied and kind of reviving somebody in lots of different ways.
Yeah. I always think of handwriting as, like, someone's voice on a page in a way, you know, like, that. It has that, like, uniqueness of, you know, because if someone typed out, you know, in Times New Roman, size 12, it all looks the same. It doesn't have that, like, unique quality that someone's voice does in the same way that, like, their handwriting does, because everybody's handwriting is a little bit different. Everybody's voice is a little bit different, you know.
Now, here's a question. Could a cookbook be an audiobook?
Oh.
That's a good question. Certainly a lot of the creative nonfiction memoirs that have recipes in them and the novels that have recipes in them that I teach have been turned into audiobooks. But those recipes are, like, embedded, you know, in the book. So if you're getting the kimchi recipe in Crying in H. Mark by Michelle Zahner, it's embedded in this really complex story she's talking about in terms of the loss of her mom and feeling like she's not authentically Korean and stuff. And so as you're listening to the ingredients and stuff, you have this whole web around it of a story. But if it's, I don't know, I think, like, honestly, going back to the Fanny Farmer or, like, the 1931 Joy of Cooking by Irma Rombauer, they're so utilitarian, those recipes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And could you retain the information you needed to make the recipe, you know? Like,
I don't know.
If it's being read to you and it's like half cup sugar, half cup butter, you're making cookies.
I think I'd be hitting the pause button a lot.
Yeah. I think a modern audience would struggle with it in the sense that we do still do a lot of reading, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, so much of our day-to-day is written down. We in Western society rely a lot less on the oral tradition nowadays.
Totally. I mean, just text messages, right?
Right.
Or writing.
Yeah. We're so used to, and as I was sort of talking about at the beginning of the episode about how, like, the recipe relies on being able to read and write, and that's something that in our modern present moment, I think a lot of us sort of take for granted of, like, yeah, of course, you know, most of us can read and write. We're so used to having everything written down and having that, like, available as a reference.
Maybe, Julia, if we went back to, you know, the dash, the handful of ingredients, maybe it'd be easier. Just because, you know, if you didn't have to remember that it was 1/4 cup of something, but it was like half a handful.
Yeah.
Maybe that would make it a bit easier. Yeah, one of us needs to record a cookbook and then see how it does. So, do we want to play our game?
Yes. I think we will. We've done enough chatting, as if that's not the whole podcast, the whole point of the podcast. I think we will go to our food fact of the day, which is not really a food fact of the day, but is a game, as I understand. Yeah. Well,
I leaned into the nail polish game.
Okay.
Yes.
But what I did was I did a little digging around, particularly since, of course, you both know I'm a Victorianist as well as a foodie. The game is it a nail polish or is it a Victorian recipe.
I love it.
Okay. I'm so excited. Let's go get the food fact of the day, aka our nail polish game.
Let's go.
All right. So
I'm going to turn slightly away so
that's
that
fine.
I don't.
I don't think you can see my notes anyway. So this game I'm calling, is it nail polish or a Victorian recipe? Okay.
Okay. And you've gotten these recipes from?
So I have nail polish from a source I will tell you later.
Okay.
And then I have Victorian recipes from two sources. One of them is a cookbook I brought with me called the Victorian Cookbook, Michelle Berrydale Johnson, published in 1989. It's a British book. And it's cool because it's also like a history of 19th century cooking,
Okay.
which I love.
Yeah.
Love it.
And it moves chronologically. So kind of what I was talking about in terms of the history of American cookbooks, it kind of does that with British cookbooks, which is cool, across the 19th century. And then online, and maybe you know this, so English Heritage, which is kind of like our Smithsonian, I guess, they have a YouTube channel called The Victorian Way. And they
that does sound
have
familiar.
an actor who, kind of like a docent at Historic St. Mary City, plays the part of Mrs. Avis Crowcombe. Does this ring any bells?
Maybe.
And Mrs. Avis Crowcombe was the head cook at a place called Audley End House. I mean, what a name, Audley End House.
Yeah.
In the 1880s. And so I think for museum studies folks out there, I think this is very smart. What they did is they took this, docent who's pretending to live as if they're in the 19th century, and they actually found this manuscript, back to like the amazing things that to this day pop up, that was handwritten by somebody named Mrs. Avis Crowcombe.
Oh, wow.
And so now they've turned it into the Victorian Way cookbook, et cetera, or rather the new cookery book.
Mm-hmm.
But if you haven't looked at the YouTube channel, I highly recommend. Like, she's in full costume. All of the kitchen accoutrements she uses are 19th century. It's very fun. It's very fun.
Love it.
Okay, and for folks at home, if you're new to the show or you haven't listened to previous episodes where we played the nail polish game, in this case, Jennifer is going to read the title of something to us, to me and Julia, and we are going to have to decide if we think it is the title of a Victorian recipe or a nail polish.
Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
I'm
Okay.
ready.
Let's start with Lady Betty's Delight.
Lady Betty's Delight. I'm going to go recipe.
I also think it... Now, how are we keeping score? Is this me versus Julia? Is this a collaborative effort? Whatever it is, I want to win.
I kind of love the idea of it being collaborative.
Okay.
So the two of you are on one team and I'm on the other.
All right. So I was also going to say... I was also thinking recipe. So we will final answer recipe.
Recipe.
Ding, ding, ding. All right.
Great.
It is from English Heritage, the Victorian Way. It is a warmed boiled pudding that has currants, custard, bread, and bone marrow.
Oh.
Bone
Okay.
marrow.
Is it meant to be a savory pudding, I guess?
No, not
No?
with the currants. Nuh-uh. It's supposed to be sweet. But the bone marrow must do something in terms of the richness
Thickening.
of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
Because again, these are like puddings that were originally like boiled in cheesecloth.
Right.
They're like, they're kind of like bowling balls when they
Yeah.
come out. You know, and then like sometimes you douse them in alcohol and you light them aflame like brandy or something.
Right.
Currants are almost always, I think, they're kind of requisite in these boiled puddings.
Yeah.
All right, well done.
Okay.
All right, jelly-filled fountain.
Oh, that's a nail polish.
Yeah, that does feel like a nail polish.
Ding, ding, ding.
All right.
That is sparkly purple nail polish with reflective glitter.
Ooh.
You all are doing well here so far. Okay, whoopsie daisies.
Ooh. Okay. Now I see how this could be hard.
That could easily go either way.
It's almost as if that's the point of the game.
I know. Ugh, my instinct. Ooh,
My
my
instinct
instinct
says
is
nail
to say
polish.
nail polish. But what about you, Nicole?
That is, yeah, exactly the same.
Okay, I agree. Nail polish.
On a roll. Ding, ding, ding.
Oh, okay.
Well done. So, like I said, I'll have the reveal of where the nail polish names came from in a minute. But these were polishes that just didn't have the look, shimmer, overall aesthetic we were after. So it's like the rejects, but they're selling them at a reduced price. That's why they're whoopsie daisies.
Oh, okay. I get it.
Okay.
Oh, so they don't. It's not like this is a line of a particular color. The whoopsie daisies are
All different kinds of colors.
Oh, okay.
And they're like the ones
I was definitely like, oh, they're probably like a light yellow.
Yeah.
Nope, they're the ones that like they're selling anyway
They're the
because they're
bargain bin.
cheaper and
Yeah. Okay.
they didn't quite work out. All right, tipsy cake.
Tipsy cake. Is this Robin Bates's whiskey cake?
At the end of a semester in his upper level classes, would bring a cake that had about half a bottle of whiskey.
That shit was
soaked into it.
Wrong.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So I was in some upper level class with him, and he brought it to class on the last day, and we were passing that around, and it was like, oh.
Right.
Can I get the name one more time?
Tipsy cake.
Tipsy cake.
My gut says recipe.
I also think recipe.
I brought this one because of Robin Bates. Ding,
Okay.
ding, 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 ding. So the tipsy
I sniffed
cake,
you out just like I sniffed out the whiskey in that cake.
Yes, you did. Although that cake, you could smell it down the hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really could smell it down the hall.
So tipsy cake is actually pulled from Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, probably the most famous and important British cookbook of the 19th century from 1861. Her name was Isabella Beeton. And it was, as is often the case with those 18th and 19th century cookbooks, it was, recipes for medicines, stuff that had nothing to do with recipes, like how to deal with unruly children.
Yeah, just general domestic troubles and challenges.
It was a domestic, handbook, basically. But I brought the recipe. Isabella appended a long note about almond cultivation to this recipe, but said nothing else about this very popular dish. It was, however, illustrated on a raised cake stand in the book, which is a very effective way of presenting it. And basically what this recipe, I have not made it, is a stale sponge cake, okay?
I love that you start with, like, recipe for cake.
Stale.
Get cake. First of all, you just have a cake. Not even like make a cake, but like
right.
have cake.
And let it sit there for a long time that it's stale.
Have cake. Let it get old.
Right. And then it's brandy, 6 tablespoons, about 10 ounces of sherry or a sweet wine, and then almond slices, okay? And then you're supposed to have like custard or cream on the side. But you can see the picture here, Nicole.
Yeah.
So all it is this alcohol-soaked old cake with slivered almonds like stuck all over it. That's it.
You know what that's giving? That's giving like my husband's coworkers or boss or whatever are coming home or coming over for dinner, but he didn't give me enough notice, so I'm just gonna like put something together. But I don't really like them that much anyway, so I'm gonna,
Although you have to always have a stale cake at the ready.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is like company is coming on a short notice.
Mm-hmm.
The almond sticking out of it is it almost looks like a little porcupine cake.
It looks like a porcupine cake.
Yeah, little hedgehog.
Yeah, totally. All right. Do we keep going? So far, you're perfect.
Let's go.
Yeah.
All right. Gilded fondant.
Gilded fondant.
I have thoughts, but I'm going to let Julia. Do you have thoughts?
I have thoughts.
Okay.
My instinct is nail polish, but I could be convinced otherwise.
I also was going to say nail polish, and the reason I say that is because did we even have fondant at this point in history?
That's a good question. It depends, I guess, on where in the 1800s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Later on, definitely we did.
I'm thinking also, I don't know if the Victorians would have like gold, like if we're thinking like literally gilded, like gold leaf on their food at this point. But maybe, I don't know. Jennifer's like, she's not giving anything away. She's just doing some eyebrows.
Stone-faced.
Yeah. I agree that I think we should go nail polish.
I think nail polish.
Ding, 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 ding.
Ah,
well done.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a white nail polish, actually.
Okay.
And yes, the Victorians did, if they had the money, eat gold leaf.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which was, if I understand correctly, I could be wrong, but I think that this comes from the Empire and East India.
Oh.
And to this day, when I was in India in 2007, you could go into a baker's shop and they would have these exquisite little pedophores that had gold leaf on them.
Ooh.
So, and that goes back to the Renaissance.
Okay.
If you're thinking about people who were ultra rich,
Right.
and then, sugar, of course, through colonialism and enslavement was more abundant, particularly if you were wealthy enough to buy it in copious amounts. And they would make sugar sculptures in the center of their tables and stuff like that. And so gold leaf, anyway, it's kind of like Donald Trump and his gold toilets, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't get any more like Richie Rich than I am so rich that I can literally eat gold.
Yeah, I can eat gold.
You know?
Exactly right. Exactly right. All right. Saffron buns.
Did you say saffron?
Saffron buns.
Okay.
I mean, this feels like a recipe to me. Or it could be a very trick question.
Yeah. Buns does not seem like a nail polish noun.
I do know saffron buns are a thing. Like, that is an actual food.
Okay.
But I don't know if it's Victorian food.
Do you want to go recipe?
My vote is recipe.
Okay.
What's your vote?
Yeah, I think recipe as well.
Perfection. Ding, ding, ding.
Yay!
This is also from the English heritage. This is made for Easter in the Victorian period. And of course, saffron is available because of colonialism, the imperial project, right? And so you have spices coming from all over the world to the British Isles, right? It's primarily for Easter. I guess what they said in the YouTube video was that because they're bright yellow and so they're sunny, right? And they feel like spring.
Sure.
And they kind of maybe look a little bit reminiscent of eggs. I don't know.
Sure.
But flour, sugar, yeast, eggs, milk, butter, lemon, spices, and saffron.
That sounds yummy.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I would like to make them.
Yeah.
They sound really good.
There you
They
go.
sound really good. Okay, let's do a couple more. All
Okay.
right. Miss Tiddlypinks.
Ooh. That sounds like one of your fancy ice creams, Julia.
I know, that does sound close to one of my fancy 1920s ice creams.
I know, I love your game. It's so much fun. It always makes me want to eat those sundaes.
Yeah.
Can you say it again?
It's Miss Tiddlypinks.
Tiddlypinks.
Miss Tiddlypinks. That's a nail polish.
All right, I'm willing to be convinced. I trust Julia more than I trust myself.
Ding, 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 ding. I think it's the pinks, right? It's not
Yeah.
pinks.
It's the pinks.
It's pinks, right? So this is a sparkly fuchsia nail polish that comes with a little Miss Tiddlypinks kind of hedgehog sticker that you can put on your nail.
Aww. That's cute.
Very kind of Victorian hedgehog, sort of.
I like that you get a friend with it.
Yeah, you get a
Comes
friend.
with a friend.
You get a friend.
Yeah.
All right. Plum Duff. Duff. Plum Duff.
That feels like a recipe to me because I feel like plums are very English Victorian somehow.
That does feel like a recipe, but I'm cautious.
If we're thinking just linguistically in our modern parlance, I don't know how much we would use the word duff. That also feels
That's
like
true.
an older word.
I'm down to say recipe.
Okay. Let's say recipe.
Ding, 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 ding.
Man, all right.
Well done. So this is actually a recipe from the street stalls of London. Okay. Ooh. There's a book that comes out in 1861, same year as Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management. And it's called Plain Cookery Book for the Working Classes. And so in this cookbook I brought 129. All right, the plum duff. Duff is a colloquial way of saying dough, okay? So plum duff is one of the street eatables, though perhaps it is rather a violence to class with its sweet pastry. Such a strange thing. This is a direct quote from the cookbook, which is usually made by the vendors. It is simply a boiled plum or currant pudding of the plainest description. The puddings are boiled in cotton bags in coppers or large pans. Coppers is a copper, like...
big pot.
Pot. The charge is a halfpenny each, so a halfpenny. And the duff is certainly designed to warm the cockles of the heart and keep out the winter cold. And although the street ones may have been a bit basic with, this is the writer of the cookbook, with an extra handful or two of currants, a plum duff can be very tasty. Huh. One last one?
Yeah. All right.
Yes.
We'll do one more.
Last one.
Let's see if we can have a perfect score.
Oh my goodness. Has there ever been a perfect score on the nail polish game?
I don't think so.
Nope.
I feel like we've each, anytime we played one of these games, somebody always gets at least one wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the stakes
I was going to say, like,
stakes
it's because we're using, like, our combined brain power as if we don't already, like,
telepathically
more or less
communicate.
share the same brain. Yeah.
I love it. Canton sherbet.
Whoa.
Oh, say that again?
Canton sherbet. Canton.
Recipe.
Oh, I was going to say nail polish. I feel like it's... Then again, when are we using the word Canton, you know?
I do know those Victorians loved sherbet.
Did they? Okay.
That's just a feeling I have.
It feels
I don't know if
true.
they
It
did or
feels
not.
right. All right, I'll go with Julia. We can say recipe.
Ding, 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 ding.
We did it!
Yes!
100%.
Wow.
I brought this one in because it's from the Fanny Farmer's Boston Cooking School Cookbook, which is the only American cookbook in this Victorian cookbook. Canton sherbet. And it doesn't explain why it's called Canton, which I find frustrating. I don't know if it's like Canton, Ohio or something. Ices and other frozen dishes comprise the most popular desserts. This is Fanny. Hygienically speaking, of course, she would talk about that. They cannot be recommended for the final course of a dinner, as cold mixtures reduce the temperature of the stomach, thus retarding digestion until the normal temperature is again reached. But how cooling, refreshing, and nourishing when properly taken, and of what inestimable value in the sick room. Of course, because she was always interested in helping those people convalesce, right?
The sick and the convalescent, yeah.
The sick and the convalescent,
Yeah.
indeed. All right.
Yay!
That was
Wow.
fantastic. Well
We-
done, you two.
We did it. There are some tricky ones in there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. And I was going to tell you. So there is a website called Victorian Varnish.
Oh,
Ooh.
so that's where all the nail polish
That's where
came
all
from?
the nail polishes came
Ah.
from. It's an immersive steampunk polish experience. So,
An experience.
an experience,
Awesome.
yes. And it's a mother-daughter team that make these Victorian varnish nail polishes. So all the recipes came from women writers, and the company Victorian Varnish is run by women. So
There
yeah.
you go. All right. Cool.
I'm checking that out later.
Yeah. So now that we've done our food fact of the day, usually at this point we would go into our wiggy portion about.
Wiggy?
Oh yes, so wiggy as in wig sex, women, gender,
Oh,
sexuality.
of course.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
wiggy portion.
I reminded Julia the other day. I was like, I think we should probably remind people what that means so that they're not
I
just
know.
like, what?
Yeah, wiggy sex.
Yeah. So let's talk gender. So obviously, the sharing of recipes is pretty feminized, as we
Totally.
have discussed.
And like I said before, the distinction between the cook and the chef, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's really at the end of the 19th century when your girl Fanny Farmer became, I guess, a kind of chef celeb. I mean, certainly she was known on both sides of the Atlantic. But you have the rise of professionalism that we just kind of take for granted now.
Yeah.
If you think about women writers in the 19th century, writing the most popular genre of the day, the novel, in part they were so successful because the profession of authorship connected to publishing was nascent, like it was in its early days, right?
Mm.
And so, they are able to kind of take on that authority of authorship because it's kind of a vacuum insofar as the novel in particular, which was still novel, right? It was still new.
Right.
And so women writers writing novels proliferate, Hawthorne famously calls them the damned mob of scribbling women. And they make serious money, right? Harry Beecher Stowe writes Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is only outsold by the Bible in the 19th century, right? And so and actually the Beecher sisters have their own book of household management that has some
Right.
recipes and all of that. So I mean, it's like an industry. All of a sudden, the domestic, both narratives of romance, of course, narratives of seduction with the Gothic novel, all of that, right? It's goes back to what I said about the grocery store fiction, right? It's the grocery store fiction of its day. And since literacy rates are so high in both England and America and in the continent, you have 90+% of people in all these various countries are literate. They can read. Mm-hmm. And so women are gobbling down these books. But then after, at least in the United States, the Civil War, all of a sudden you have men are like, oh, there's money to be made here.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ticknor and Fields, let's say, was one of the publishers out of Boston that started to say, hey, we kind of want to have standards for this profession. Mm-hmm. And what are those standards going to look like? And, maybe people like a Nathaniel Hawthorne would be better read if we did a better job of recruiting them and promoting their work and and we'll get more serious readers, right? You also have more and more people, men in particular, going to college. What are they going to get taught in their English classes? What is the literature of North America in particular, right? Because the Brits had attacked the new country back at the end of the 18th century, early 19th century for not having a literature, for just stealing, European literature, British literature in particular. And so once you start to have the formation of an American literature canon, and then there is this money to be made in publishing, then you start to have men running the publishing industry. And with the rise of professionalism, fewer and fewer women get to publish. Cookbooks, however, are always a bestseller.
Yeah.
So you really don't get to kind of chefs that are male publishing their cookbooks until the middle of the 20th century. And that's because you need enough of a middle class, particularly between the wars, to be able to have the resources, the money, to go to restaurants.
Yes.
And then that profession of chef, like the profession of novelist, becomes one that is more and more aligned not with women, but with men. So that's pretty wig sexy.
Yeah, I would say so.
I mean, definitely in the sense of, like, we had our episode on restaurants a while back. I think that's, like, one of the earliest ones we did.
Yeah, it's like episode 3, I think.
But how, like, as soon as the profession was taken out of the home and became something that could be capitalized, it became a male-dominated field.
Totally.
And, you know, totally the same with, I feel like, cookbooks as well, you know? As soon as it was something that could be extremely capitalized and marketed, and, like, not for a housewife, you know, like, so much of Fanny Farmer's work was, you know, in her cookbooks, and Amelia Simmons and, you know, all these other writers writing for other women in the home. As soon as it became writing for not necessarily domestic labor, but, like, you know, a pastime, you know, cooking as a pastime, or, like, cooking as, like, something exploratory, you have, like, this explosion of chef cookbooks and, like, male written cookbooks. And
right, so you have James Beard, you know, you have what's his name, Claiborne, writing for the New York Times. And so once you have, you know, kind of that elevation that it's more posh, right, and it takes a certain level of expertise, and expertise is always attached to the masculine, right, whereas amateur is attached to the feminine, right? And then you just think about the rise of the Food Network and all of that. And so your Gordon Ramsay, your Iron Chef.
Your Emeril Lagasse.
Totally. Emeril, yes. Your Jamie Oliver, for that matter. You know, all of a sudden that becomes a certain kind of, I don't know, aesthetic in and of itself, right? And it's very masculine. I mean, Ramsay in particular, right? You know, Hell's Kitchen, all of that kind of stuff. And even today, like, you think about the pioneer woman, right? Or the pioneer woman.
Yeah.
So Ree Drummond.
Our personal enemy.
So, I mean, her aesthetic, it really kind of tracks with tradwife identities and all of that, right? And so, yes, women are on TV and they have cookbooks, or Joanna Gaines and the whole Magnolia industry. Which is
also, they're very Christian. I know that.
Deeply so.
Deeply,
They're Baylor University grads, They're Baptist. They're selling domesticity in Target, right? But it's a certain kind of aesthetic of domesticity. And so it's really important that she be feminine, right? That she not be a chef, that she be a home cook. And all of her cookbooks, Magnolia Table,
and all of her children,
her TV show.
Also, they're always having the children on the show. Like, don't forget, she's also a mom.
Right. Well, and the Pioneer Woman does that too now.
Yeah.
Like, her children are now regularly on that show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that then takes kind of the cookbook almost into, like, a different sphere because it splits. To this day, there are, like, cookbooks that are kind of meant for women consumers and cookbooks that are meant for male consumers. And those cookbooks for male consumers are probably being used by women in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, it has, again, like, that kind of sense of, but this is a professional.
Right.
You know, these recipes are being made by people who are trained. They know what they're doing.
But, I mean, like we've talked about on this show many times before, it's all marketing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's all about marketing and how things are branded and how, you know, what audience are you selling to.
It's a different readership, right?
Yeah.
So I mentioned, you know, Michelle Zauner's Crying in H Mart. You know, that's a story of mothers and daughters, right? And so that's still primarily going to be geared toward women readers, right? But Anthony Bourdain's, right, Kitchen Confidential, right, where he's, like, exposing kind of, you know, the kind of back room of restaurant culture, since he was a chef and everything. I actually think The Bear plays into this too.
Yeah.
Right? This idea of, you know, it's fast, it's furious, people are swearing all the time, you know, it's a competition.
Right.
Iron Chef. That's, you know, people who like Anthony Bourdain, it tends to be men.
I think, like, a really great example of this, and these are a couple of books that cookbooks. You have the feminized Animal Vegetable Miracle, and then you have more for the masculine audience, like Michael Pollan's Omnivore Dilemma or something like that.
Yeah.
The way in Animal Vegetable Miracle, it's so much about, like, the homestead and
the family.
you know, she's making like they're making the same arguments in both books.
Totally.
I feel like, or basically like super close about like, you know, slow food and growing food and like what you're eating in both Omnivore's Dilemma and Animal Vegetable Miracle. But the way that Michael Pollan writes it is very much like sources of expertise, like you said, and like all of this science and very much white man. I read an article.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I don't remember the author's name for Animal Vegetable Miracle, but
Barbara Kingsolver.
She was like, I'm doing it. I'm living it. Like, I'm growing the food and things like that.
Well, and back again to ideas of authorship. Michael Pollan is the sole author of Omnivore's Dilemma, and he takes you through 4 sections of that book. He starts with the fast food meal. He ends with the foraged meal, okay, to kind of show you the trajectory of like the industrial, you know, kind of foodscape all the way to like the more, I guess, natural foodscape that you can just get on your own. But it's all about him. And yes, he talks to people. He's a journalist, right? But the focus is actually him. Whereas Kingsolver's is written by her husband, and her daughter.
Right. Yeah, it's very, like, family
It's
focused.
Collaborative,
yeah.
You know? And so even that idea, like, authorship that is shared, I think is inherent to the genre of the recipe. And that's why I think it's, in some ways, just kind of inherently feminist, a feminist act, to write recipes and share them.
I mean, it's, you know, one way of literally writing your story as, you know, like a woman and throughout history, right? Like, for so much of it, this was how you could get into publishing.
Totally.
The restaurant episode, there was this whole, for the Wig Sex section, I read this whole book, great book about feminist restaurants of the 70s. And then I read recently, just for fun, a book about suffragettes and suffragette cookbooks, and how, like, in both instances, and I feel like a lot of this still applies today, the act of making these choices about how we feed ourselves, how we write about food, our restaurants, our recipes, are not only like feminist acts, but they could also be made into like very radical feminist acts of like the comparison of the female form and like meat, and how that is throughout history kind of treated the same way.
What time do you have to go?
No.
Okay. All right. So this has been a wonderful, fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for coming, Jennifer.
It has been my deep pleasure. And I also just want to say that I am so mesmerized by the two of you and this whole project of Girls Lunch. And you're both just wonderful people in all ways. I'm proud of you, but I'm also just, I don't know, in awe of you. I just want you to know that. I really am.
Oh, how many times can I cry on this podcast today? What's an acceptable number?
Do we get a passing grade?
Do we get an A?
A++.
Yay!
Yay!
Jennifer, before we let you go, to the people listening, is there anything you want to plug? Where can people find you? What are you working on right now?
Well, I think in terms of my most recent work, I do have something coming out with my lifetime collaborator, Melissa Goldthwaite, but that's going to be a part of a Modern Language Association handbook on teaching the literatures of food. So not only now are there some anthologies and texts that people can use in those kinds of classrooms, but this is going to be a compendium of helping people think through strategies for teaching food as something serious, as something to really kind of pay attention to.
Love that.
But I just had an Audible original drop that is actually about The Handmaid's Tale and how we're living it. But my Audible original before that is also called Books That Cook, Food and Fiction. And that's the most current thing other than my Good Eats anthology that came out last year. I guess I have a lot.
Yeah, you guess. Yeah.
That also came out with NYU Press. It's also co-edited with my collaborator, Melissa Goldthwaite. And that's 32 writers thinking through all kinds of topics relative to the ethics of eating, like eating meat and what that does to the planet. But then also stuff that is less perhaps thought of right away. St. Mary's grad Will Becker has an essay in that piece, and it's called Men and Meat. And it's all about both the literalness of masculinity and meat, but also the metaphor of meat and the meat market and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, we got to check that out.
Yeah.
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. Now comes the part of the episode that is perhaps the hardest for me and Julia, which is saying goodbye, but also trying to say goodbye in sync.
We can never manage it somehow.
So, do you want to try to say it with us?
Sure, I would love to do that.
Thanks for lunching with us, and
we'll see you next time.
Bye!
Yay!
Bye.
Okay.
Our theme music is Red Onions by Louis Zong. Please check out the rest of his album Vegetable Soul in the description. If you have an episode suggestion or want to say hi, you can email us at girlslunchpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.
I have nothing written for this. I don't know why I'm scrolling.